Hi everyone, this is a recording for chapters 15 and 16, which are on midlife. So we're going to discuss the physical, then the cognitive, and finally the socio-emotional development that takes place in this age range. So we can see the student learning outcomes for 15 and for 16 here. And we're going to start more with some physical development and some general trends in midlife. So we've gotten to look at the population pyramid when watching the most recent documentary over the Thanksgiving holiday. But with the population pyramid, we're able to see that really an increasing percentage of the population is going to be older, so midlife and especially older adults. So there are important things that happen during midlife that we need to take consideration of. We are losing some physical skills. We have a lot of responsibility on our plate. We want to really give something back. Erickson actually says that giving something back is going to be our biggest goal here in this stage. And then we really want to reach and maintain career satisfaction. But we're likely to have a lot of really challenging events happen in midlife. A lot of people in midlife report being very stressed. So things like the death of a parent, your children moving out, becoming an empty nester, grandparenthood, retirement. Many of these things are great, and we look forward to them, like being a grandparent, retiring, but there is a lot of responsibility and a lot of stress on us in midlife. Some of this we'll see physically, so we have some changes in appearance, we have some gains and some losses, so we see that throughout the lifespan. You know, we have strengths and weaknesses in every area of the life. But we do get things in midlife like wrinkles and gray hair. A lot of people will lose height and gain weight, so that can lead to this sarcopenic obesity, which, you know, me in pronouncing words may not be perfect there, but, you know, leads to this lower height, larger weight. And then we do see a bone mass deceleration there. So there's a lot of physical changes. This slide also goes over some of those physical changes. We've talked about hearing and vision issues before. Many times we start seeing some of these chronic changes, chronic diseases that we hadn't seen earlier in the lifespan. So things with the cardiovascular system, lungs, heart disease, cancer. You know, so we're seeing a lot of those physical concerns that we did not see prior to this age period. We also just, you know, have a few other bullet points randomly kind of thrown in the bottom there about health. So we're seeing less sexual activity, and then also in the midlife area, people who are highly religious is often positively linked to health. So it's just a little bit of information more about health. We just mentioned, you know, older adults often have, or middle-aged adults often have less sex than younger adults, but we're getting kind of a difference in the way that we perceive sexuality as we age. So it used to just be, you know, in the media, most acts of sexuality were between younger individuals. So we'd see it in shows about, you know, college and people just getting, you know, started on their adult lives. But now we're really seeing a lot of films like, you know, Meet the Fockers, Sex and the City, How Stella Got Her Groove Back, really representing what sexuality can look like in midlife. So it doesn't go away. It's still there. But we still do kind of see this double standard. So many times as men age and hit midlife, we consider them to be more attractive maybe than they were before. But for women, the expectation still is often that the woman will look very young, and she can receive criticism for these markers of aging. So the late Carrie Fisher was someone who experienced this. When she did Star Wars again, people were surprised and saying, hey, you don't look like Princess Leia. And she's like, well, I'm, you know, 30, 40 years older than Princess Leia was. So, you know, it's just a big difference there and sometimes what we expect for men versus women. We also see a lot of changes actually taking place, and specifically for women, but we have this climacteric, so it's this passing from reproductive to non-reproductive years. It's a process. So this process we call this perimenopause. It can be, you know, up to 10 years or so, and it's a transition from menstruation to menopause. So from having that monthly menstrual cycle to not having the cycle. During menopause is when the monthly menstrual cycle stops, and many people report being excited about this change. So you can no longer get pregnant, which many people feel is a relief. You know, you're not having a menstrual cycle anymore, which many women report as a relief, but there can be some unpleasant side effects. Hormone replacement therapy used to be given regularly for these side effects, but it has some benefits and drawbacks, so it has to be kind of considered with the help of your doctor. There's also a YouTube video linked in there that is kind of a humorous one about the changes that happen with menopause. With men, we don't see this direct kind of menopause like states, so we have no clear end to being able to reproduce for men. There are some changes though. More men will struggle with lower levels of testosterone, may influence the ability and the desire to engage in sex. We can also see erectile dysfunction occur, so difficulty maintaining that erection. But still, the man there in that photograph, there's a few videos linking to him on this slide, and he's actually the world's oldest dad. So he was in his 90s when he fathered a child. And so, you know, for men, they can father a child all the way up through the end of their lifespan. Might be a little harder to do so, but, you know, it is possible. I've mentioned before, talking about midlife, that this is a time where many people report high levels of stress. This is just a definition of stress here. It's going to be any kind of stressor, and we have this appraisal process. So if you've got maybe a test coming up, that's a stressor, and we can say, is this test a challenge or is it a threat? If you say it's a challenge, you're like, awesome, I'm going to get a lot out of this. If you say it's a threat, though, then we have to say, you know, how many options do I have? What can be effective? And if you say, you know, I can study really hard with my best friend and we're going to ace this test, it's low threat. If you say, I really don't know how to study, I don't know what to expect, I feel totally lost, then the stress is high threat. So there's a lot of efforts to deal with stress. We know these things. Some are related to the situation, and they're controllable. So, some are related to controllable situations. So if you've got something like a test that's somewhat in your control, you can help yourself prepare for that. You can, make decisions about how to study. You can set minor goals. Some stressors, though, are going to be uncontrollable. Like if someone near to you has an illness, a really bad illness, you can't fix that illness. And so what we often do then are more emotion-focused responses. So journaling, meditation, those things that just help us deal with that uncontrollable stressor. And then this little chart here shows some of the stressors that middle-aged adults experience, and then some of the things that they really enjoy that they experience, the uplifts. And so, you can read through that chart, but what we're seeing a lot is that middle-aged adults really are having a lot of stressors, and often the times it's because of juggling so many activities. So, they have children relying on them, sometimes aging parents relying on them, a time of really, digging into the workplace and trying to save for retirement. And so there's just so many things happening in midlife that we can see a lot of stress, and this stress can really impact physical health in a negative way. So this shows some of the effects of high cortisol, which is related to stress, but it starts to make us gain fat, especially around the abdomen, makes some have cardiovascular issues, and it can even do things like unravel these ends to our chromosomes, these telomeres. It can unravel that and actually cause some more of those physical signs of aging. And so it can be extremely detrimental to have these high levels of stress. And we do see these effects more readily in middle age, so it's very important to get a handle on one's stress. So that gets us through physical, and we're going to talk some about cognitive. For cognitive, we've looked at this chart before with our crystallized and our fluid types of intelligence, but we see this is just adding an extra kind of word to that. So mechanics is a word that's used, but it really is implying that fluid intelligence, and then pragmatics is really implying that crystallized intelligence. So we see still that same pattern, though, the fluid or the mechanics of intelligence kind of decreasing with age, that ability to remember, facts and accumulate info and expertise, that's our pragmatics or our crystallized, and that seems to be increasing, or at least stabilizing with age. We're not losing that ability. Many times too in midlife we have people who are true experts. So expertise really peaks in middle age. People rely a lot on their experience. They process information very quickly and flexibly. So if you had to fix this vehicle behind us, someone who's brand new to mechanics is going to have certain, troubleshooting degrees that they need to go through. It may take them an hour or two to fix this. Someone who's been fixing engines for 20 years may be able to come to the solution readily, very quickly and fix it in a much more efficient manner. Even though they're having maybe some of the physical slowdown, their expertise allows them to maintain really, really impressive function levels there. Expertise, though, it can be an issue, so it can lead to the loss of ability to explain a solution. So if you've ever had to work with someone who is an expert in an area and they know it really, really well, and they're trying to explain it to you, and you're like, yeah, I don't get it. I had a chemistry teacher like that, so amazing in chemistry, but then when you tried to explain it on a lower level, it was like just nothing, couldn't understand it. So that can be one issue with expertise. In midlife, people are also getting, really, really great at practical intelligence, so solving those real world problems. There's a lot of these that we have to deal with every day, and in midlife, we're really seeing this ability to reason more flexibly, to put in the emotion, the logic, the needs of others, and so that practical intelligence is really strong here in midlife. Some information about work. So work is something that's extremely central in midlife, in middle age. There's, general functions for work. We know these already. You're going to make a living, so we work to make money. But it also helps us get, our meaning, makes us have an identity. So if we say something like, "Hi, I'm Bob, I'm a lawyer," that's part of our identity. And so work is something that's really, really central to midlife. This is actually Super's theory. We talked about this a little bit in adolescence, so kind of those early stages of trying to figure out what career you wanted. But we see in midlife, we end up in this consolidation kind of area where we're having career advancement and starting to work through kind of all of these new and exciting opportunities. And then there's a lot of challenges, though, in work. And, this can be things like globalization. Technology can be a big challenge. So if you've got someone who's been doing a job more manually and they're 65 and we incorporate then a more technological component, they've then got to learn that new way of doing things, which can be a challenge. It can be an amazing thing, but it can be a challenge. Some organizations are also downsizing. Retirement is definitely an issue. Even just the ability to retire, to actually sustain oneself with our longer lives can be an issue. Pensions, healthcare, we're often not seeing as many fully funded pensions and the ability to kind of have that financial security. And then we can also experience things that, really can happen at any point in the lifespan, like age, or specifically gender discrimination at any point in the lifespan. Age, though, really is kind of, not hiring an older person, discriminating against an older person in the hiring process, or, in the workplace, in the promotion process. So if you want to hire just a 25-year-old and you won't even consider a 75-year-old, that can be age discrimination, especially if it's something that both people could do quite well. And then sexual harassment is another challenge we could experience, and that's when one person has power over the other. So it's, like a boss, sexually harassing an employee. And then work-family conflict. So all of these things are aspects of work that we can struggle with as we age. But, another aspect of what we have in life, it's not all about work. So we do have leisure. And hopefully we're getting in plenty of leisure. They're discretionary activities. They are things we choose of our own free will. They might be a little bit less strenuous in middle age, but not necessarily. So many people in middle age are still doing, gymnastics and parkour and, more intense types of leisure activities. But leisure is really, really important. And a lot of times Americans don't take enough of it. But we know it really helps reduce stress, stronger immune system, and keeps us going. Just that enthusiasm for life, which is, extremely important actually for living a long, healthy life, is that social connection and enthusiasm. So leisure is super, super important. And this brings us more into some of the socio-emotional aspects of aging and of midlife. I already mentioned Erickson, so saying what he says is the most important about midlife is giving back to others. And you can do this through many ways. So sometimes it's through having children, through parenting. Other times it's mentoring somebody in the workplace, taking on like big brothers, big sisters, and helping mentor children in your community. But really you're just trying to say, I want to be productive, I want to guide the next generation. The opposite of that is stagnation. So that is when everything is really self-focused and you're just, worried about your own money and your own time, and you're not trying to make any influence on the future generation. So Erickson would say, generativity is really, really want to be able to accomplish in midlife. We've also probably all heard the term midlife crisis. So this is an idea that at midlife, everything just kind of falls apart. We actually don't see that, though, as a universal experience. So, many times instead what we get is a midlife correction. So instead of a whole crisis where it's, oh no, everything's falling apart, instead it's a correction. So am I doing what I want to be doing? Am I with the person I want to be with? Am I hitting my goals? Am I making my dreams happen? And if not, making those necessary adjustments. So it's not necessarily a falling apart, just more of an adjustment period. There's other ideas about how life events will influence development. So one is this life events approach. And with this, it's just saying that this life event itself, which is in green here, has a lot of developmental factors that are important. And so we've got the mediating factors like physical health and personality and how we adapt and how we cope, and all of that then relates to how the event influences development. So just kind of saying that we've got all these events. The events itself may not be the important trigger. What it is how we cope and how we adapt and where we're at in life and in our socio-historical context. So some of these historical contexts then are called what they are called is cohort effects. And so with this, your cohort is the group of individuals with which you are kind of journeying through life. And so they're different, for baby boomers versus millennials versus Gen Z. So these different historical times, different social expectations. So we might have someone in the silent generation who would have loved to be a surgeon, but she was a woman and wasn't able to pursue that. Whereas now we have a millennial who is pursuing that. So, just different expectations for people. We have different expectations across gender and then across culture. And so even this idea of being middle-aged is not really clear across many cultures. So it's you're an adult and then you're older, not this idea of having this whole new stage of midlife. And so, even that itself is a context-based thing. So we've got some to talk about in personality. So with personality, the big model that psychologists often rely on is this 5-factor model. And we call it the oceans or the canoe. So that's because we get O-C-E-A-N, or this is listed as canoe here. And it just says that we have these 5 factors that we all either score high or low on, or somewhere in the middle, and that really dictates who we are as a person. So you can be really careful, dependable, and self-disciplined, to be high in conscientiousness, or you can be, none of those things and be very low in conscientiousness. So I know for me, extroversion, I'm very low in that. So I'm actually, an introvert, even though may not always look like it. I am very much an introvert. And so we'd be able to then plot people along these dimensions. And what we actually find, which is pretty interesting to me, is that if we look at, a 19-year-old and a 49-year-old, generally we're not seeing a ton of change. There is some changes, so we do become a little less neurotic, a little bit more agreeable, conscientious, but we're not seeing, I was an introvert in high school, and I'm probably going to be an introvert at retirement. It's not going to be this huge shift where we're no longer possessing these characteristics. So it's pretty interesting that it's relatively stable. So this gets us into some relationships factors for midlife. Many married adults are satisfied, so if the marriage was bad, they've already ended it, or they've just grown accustomed to this is what my marriage is. So many say I'm pretty satisfied. And then those friends we've kept with us, those friendships are likely to be really deep and meaningful friendships. We've talked a little bit about the empty nest already in this video, but with this, our kids are leaving home, they're grown. Sometimes they boomerang, so we throw them out and they come right back. We talked about that with adults, younger adults needing to come home for many reasons. But parents are often providing support, financial, emotional, and this is a good and a bad thing for parents. So it can be difficult, you've revolved your whole life around these kids, but it can also be amazing because you can dance naked in your living room if you want to, or whatever. So, there's good and bad. And then a lot of times when we ask adult children, they see their parents in a much more positive way, especially moms and daughters. That relationship often improves quite a bit in midlife and when the child's an adult. Some family dynamics. One word that I've really enjoyed is kin keeper. So with this idea, it's that that's the person in the family who keeps everyone in touch. So if you ever, want to know what's up with your cousin Jeff and you call grandma, grandma is the kin keeper. So typically this is a female, not always, and typically it's a matriarch or an older female. The sandwich generation we've got to hear about a little bit throughout the documentary we watched, as well as some of this other information. But this was the idea that we were going to be sandwiched, especially in midlife, between aging parents and our own young children. So if your parents were 40 when they had you and you were 40 when you had your kids, then they're going to be 90 when your kids are 10. And so you would be sandwiched between elder and young adult care. I hope that math was right. I just did it in my head. So this idea then that we could be sandwiched, and this really then revolve around us caring for our parents. So most adult children feel that they have some responsibility to care in some way for their parents, either financially or physically caring for them. And daughters really are the ones who are more likely to provide care. And that's even for their husband's family. They're more likely to provide that care. And then that brings us into grandparents. So with grandparents, there's been a lot of effort to try to decide, what types grandparents fall into, and this is not an easy thing to do. Many people report being a grandparent helps them have this biological continuity, they feel self-fulfilled, and then some have this remote role. So it's like, yeah, you exist, but we live in Michigan and you live in Puerto Rico and we just don't talk. So that's kind of this distant figure for this style. It's really hard, though, to put grandparents into a style because they can have different styles with different grandkids. So, you know, some grandparents are always formal, so just that, like, I am the matriarch and the patriarch of the family, and you will respect me, and, you know, very formal. Others are more fun-seeking, like, I'm going to take the kid out, and we're going to go to the beach, you know. And then some are just distant, they're far away. But, you know, I know my parents, I live close to them now, so they are more formal with my children and sometimes fun-seeking. But with my sister, she lives in Denver, and so they're more of a distant figure. You know, they don't really get to know her baby as much right now. So it can be hard because people live so far away. One other interesting area that's been more recent is this idea of custodial grandparenting. We have seen this in the past, so it's not entirely recent as a brand new thing. It's just we're seeing an increasing number of grandparents raising grandkids. And this can happen for so many different reasons. You know, the parents get divorced. Sometimes it's substance abuse, so it knocks out that middle generation, and the older adults have to care for the children. And this can lead to some amazing things for older adults. You know, it's having them really stay young with these kids and, you know, nurturing them and loving on them. They can also lead to a lot of health concerns, depression, stress. You know, it's not what they maybe anticipated for their older age, and that can be a real struggle. But that really ends us up with midlife, and so there's a lot of gains, a lot of losses. There's some strengths, there's some weaknesses, and that's true throughout every aspect of development. So we'll end here, and we look forward to talking about late life. Have a good week.